I would also like to thank everyone for attending for the time and the meaningful input. Remember that those at the table are not yet elected. They're just looking for a job, so be polite. I would also like to let you know that, I will now turn the floor over to Mayor Stamer, who will be moderating for the evening. So thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I'm not sure if we need the mic for my voice or not, but we'll give it a whirl. So I'm hoping tonight, thanks very much for being on time, everybody. It's a great turnout. Hopefully the night goes better than my glasses, because I just went to put my glasses on and they broke. So if that's all that happens tonight, well then everything is really good, really well. So I'm not sure if everybody has a copy of the agenda, but I'd like to run it through us as quickly as we can, because we've got a lot of things to discuss tonight. I'm sure that we've got a lot of really good questions for our candidates. And so I just wanted to run through kind of what the agenda, and then also the forum and the process that we're going to go through. So first off, we're going to have opening remarks by the candidates. Each candidate gets 3 minutes. We have Wynne Huben and Bev Murphy as our timers. So we end up trying to keep it as fairly tight as we can. So basically we get a green sign for the 2-minute mark, a yellow sign for the 2.5-minute mark, and a red sign for the 3-minute mark. And then after that, toss you out the door. No, seriously, don't do that. And then, so then we'll have a question and answer period after everyone gets an opportunity to speak. Candidates will be allotted 2 minutes to answer a question, and there will be 30 seconds to ask a question. And again, you have an opportunity to ask your question. Hopefully it's not a statement, it is a question. And if you feel that it's easier for you just to write the question down, there are people in the back that will be able to take that question, and then we'll be able to put it into the system as time permits. And if anybody sort of thinks that maybe there's not a lot to talk about tonight, I just quickly went on CBC today and got a copy of all the policies from all the parties, and of course I'm not going to be checking to make sure you guys know everything about your policies, but just as a quick reminder for policies, we have carbon tax, childcare, climate change, deficits, education, guns, healthcare, housing, immigration, indigenous, jobs, manufacturing, NAFTA, USMCA, pipeline, seniors, small business taxes, technology, and transportation. So if any of those items pull your interest, then we should have lots of good questions for tonight. So having said that, after the end of the question and answer period, we'll do it in reverse order. The candidates as they came in were able to pick a number, and that's how they're seated at the table, 1 through 6. So when we start, it'll be 1 through 6, and then on the closing remarks, again, 3 minutes, 6 to 1. So I'd like to introduce all the candidates first off, if I may. From the PPC, Ken Finlayson. From the NDP, Cynthia Egli. From the Green Party, Iain Currie. From the Liberal Party, Terry Lake. From the Conservative Party, Cathy McLeod. And from the Communist Party, Peter Kerek. So it's a great pleasure. We'll start the evening off with Ken Finlayson from the PPC.
First of all, thanks for including us. We've had a little friction with the CBC not including us in their debates, or at least our leaders. Anyway, good evening, and thanks for turning out. My name's Ken Finlayson, and I'm happy to be the candidate for the PPC. I don't know, does anybody here remember the old rocker James Brown? I feel good! Is that real now? Well, the reason I feel good is because I'm privileged to represent the fastest growing political party in Canadian history. And there's a good reason for that, and that's because we may not be politically correct, but we tell it like it is. We're not going to blow any smoke for you. Any one of you that feels lukewarm to the limited choices we have here in our Canadian elections, I'm glad to tell you that we're the only party on the right. You will see that tonight. I bring Maxime and myself believe in smaller government, less taxation, no more pandering to special interest groups, but equal opportunity for every Canadian. We don't believe in the nanny state. Let me tell you about our platform. We're going to abolish capital gains tax. You worked hard for it. You should keep it. We're going to raise the personal exemption to $15,000. We're going to stop subsidizing companies like the CBC. That's $1.5 billion. How about Bombardier, a family-owned company, $7.5 billion. We don't believe in corporate welfare. And we're going to eliminate, plain and simple. Of course, then there's SLE-Lavalin, Canadian Post, the never-ending black hole. We're going to privatize the airports to bring some competition, give you a little choice. We're going to scrap the carbon tax because we're the only party here tonight that completely rejects the idea that carbon dioxide is responsible for climate change. That does not mean that we don't believe in climate change. We absolutely do. However, we don't believe that carbon dioxide, the most foundational compound responsible for life on this planet, is the problem. Carbon dioxide is to plants what oxygen is to you and I. They inhale carbon dioxide. They exhale oxygen. If we eliminate carbon dioxide, we eliminate plant life. And if we eliminate plant life, guess who's next? So we're radically different in that regard. We're going to stop the unequal equalization payments that keep going to Quebec. And our leader, Maxime Bernier, probably one of the biggest reasons I'm here tonight is this is a man who believes that Quebec doesn't need over half the equalization. Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks very much. 3 minutes didn't quite cut it, but we'll give you an opportunity a little bit later to carry on, so thanks very much. Cynthia Egli, please.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. I'd like to recognize, before I get started, that we're meeting here on the unceded territory of the Secwepemc Nation. The federal NDP, can I just lower this a bit? There. The federal NDP believes in the full recognition of the human rights of Indigenous people and that all Canadians have a right to be treated equally. Many people in Barriere are finding it harder and harder to keep up, let alone get ahead. Seniors invested their working lives in making Canada better, but too many are now facing poverty. 600,000 people, seniors, 600,000 seniors in Canada are living in poverty. Affordability is a big part of our platform, a new deal for Canadians and a new deal for British Columbians. Your job situation should not determine the kind of medication that you can afford. When you or your loved ones fall ill, you shouldn't worry about how you're going to pay for your prescriptions. Through my work and activism, I have personally talked to many Kamloopsians who are making impossible choices when it comes to affording prescription drugs, especially if they don't have an extended health care plan. The World Health Organization states that access to medications is a human right. As your MP, I would advocate for a universal pharmacare program for all Canadians, including a dental care plan, so that Canadians can use their health care card instead of their credit card to get the care they need. Small businesses are the engine that drives job creation in Canada, and such an important part of every community. That's why the federal NDP is standing up for lowering small business taxes, has opposed unfair credit card merchant fees, and will fight to make it easier to pass on small businesses to our loved ones. The smothering smoke of the 2017 and 2018 forest fire seasons that I'm sure we all can't forget will soon be the new reality if we don't do something drastic. My children's lifetime, they will experience natural disasters like no other. Bold, urgent action is needed to keep BC beautiful and confront the climate crisis that the Liberals and the Conservatives in Ottawa have left our future generation of children to deal with. Our platform is explained in detail at ndp.ca. Please take a few moments to read it. Call me if you have further questions. I would love to hear from you. Thank you.
I'm Iain Currie, Green Party candidate for Kamloops-Thompson-Cariboo. I was born and raised in Kamloops. I moved back to this area 20 years ago to raise a family and to work as a Crown prosecutor. I've been knocking on doors all over this riding, all day today in Barriere and all around, and hearing about different issues that people want to discuss. And the Green Party has a full platform that addresses all the issues that are going to face Canada's next government. But there are three things that I've particularly been talking about. And the first of those is making this riding a leader in the transition to a sustainable green economy. People in the North Thompson know better than most that we need to move away from the boom and bust cycle, extracting our resources, shipping them overseas, shipping unfinished products overseas, and sometimes raw, in the instance of the forest industry, raw logs overseas, and then buying back the finished products. So the Green Party is proposing that we re-engage with our forestry sector as a federal government with a national forestry program. A national forestry strategy, and deal with our forests and our other natural resources as an asset for Canada and for the communities that make up this country. Now, the reason we need to start transitioning to a sustainable green economy is in part the second thing which I'm talking about, which is taking the urgent, decisive actions that are required to deal with the climate crisis. So the science tells us that we needed to have started yesterday. But since government after government in Canada has not addressed the climate crisis, has not started making the changes necessary, and in fact is making the choices that are taking us in the wrong direction, they're making things worse rather than better, we need to start now. And that requires which is the third thing that I'm talking about, which is making change in Ottawa. So changing the way we do politics and doing politics better. So moving away from the sniping and the finger pointing and the blame assigning, and instead working together, having a parliament that actually works. And the Green Party is the only party that's talking about actually working with other parties, working across the political spectrum, bringing together the different levels of government. And so those are the three things that I'm focusing on and I'd like to talk about, but I'm very anxious to hear your questions and excited to know what you care about. So the three things that I'm talking about are starting the transition to a clean, sustainable economy, addressing the climate crisis, and changing the way we're doing things in Ottawa. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Iain. Currie.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, first of all, for coming out tonight, taking time out of your busy evening to be informed and meet all the candidates. Thanks to the candidates, too, because it takes a lot to stick your neck out, run for public life, and for some of our candidates, it's the first time they've done it, and I can tell you from experience, it's never easy. This is a job interview, after all, and you folks can be pretty hard on us, and we need to have you hold our feet to the fire. This is someone who's going to represent you. You need to make sure you examine the policies carefully, their personalities carefully, how hard they're going to work for you. Most of you know of me. I represented the Kamloops North Thompson riding in the provincial legislature for 8 years. I've worked very closely with the community of Barriere and the North Thompson Valley on infrastructure projects, whether it's a wastewater treatment project, whether it's the seniors exercise park, the band shell. You know, we've worked together to make this community stronger and more resilient. I want to do that for you in Ottawa. And while some of you may feel like I've changed teams, I'm the same person I was. I'm on your side, and I will work hard for you. The reason I got back into politics was because of several reasons. I believe Canada is generally on the right track. Nothing's perfect, but we have the lowest unemployment in 40 years. We've had 900,000 people lifted out of poverty, including 300,000 children because of the Canada Child Benefit. This is a government investing in people, investing in communities. Doubling of the gas tax, it goes directly to municipalities to help with infrastructure. We know that rural Canada has challenges, and when I first discussed this possibility with people in the Liberal Party, I said, what is the Liberal Party doing for rural Canada? Because I think in the past, they have really not paid enough attention to rural Canada. And shortly after that, the Ministry of Rural Economic Development was set up. Now, I'm not saying I made that happen, but I think a lot of people were concerned that we need to pay more attention to rural Canada, where forest-dependent communities like Barriere, Clearwater, 100 Mile are challenged, and we need people who will step up, be a strong voice in Ottawa to air their concerns, to fight for them, and bring back benefits to these communities to make sure that we remain strong. On October 21st, I hope you will remember how hard I've worked for you in the past and how hard I will work for you in the future. Thank you very much.
So good evening, and I too would like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. And I've always said it's been a tremendous pleasure to represent the riding of Kamloops-Thompson-Cariboo. And I compare it to some of my colleagues who represent 6 blocks in Toronto, and I think that would be awfully the same. We have an incredibly beautiful riding with incredibly unique communities, whether it's Barriere, Clearwater, our many First Nations communities, and of course Kamloops. So truly, it's the diversity of the communities that make this job so incredibly interesting. And I've always really enjoyed actually working with the province, and when Terry was mentioning many of those projects, it was a good working relationship between the province and the federal government that certainly saw many important things come to fruition. I do want to say I am, however, really, whether it's provincial or federally, becoming increasingly concerned about what I would call a rural-urban divide. And I have seen, I think, over the last number of years, a government that hasn't actually really understood issues in terms of the rural areas. And I'm going to take ranching as one example. We know that our ranching community has built this country. It's been a critical part of this country. And of course, you know, it's fine that some people choose other alternatives in terms of heading into beyond the beef. But when your government is starting to say, this is the path that you have to head down, and spending $160 million in terms of funding that particular initiative, I think it really hurts some of our people to the core when they're spending millions of dollars for Loblaws fridges, but at the same time saying, oh, you know what, beef and some of our other products aren't that important anymore. And don't you find it interesting? Does anyone remember when you were supposed to have margarine instead of butter? You were supposed to have, you know, eggs and you weren't supposed to have eggs, and now all of a sudden we see that that there was a research study that came out today that said beef is actually a pretty good thing. So whether it's forestry, I hope we're going to have a lot of opportunity to talk about the forestry, rural importance of rural areas. Certainly I know our party is focused on making life more affordable for you. We know that many people are struggling day to day in terms of paying their bills, and certainly a big focus of our platform. But anyway, look forward to a great evening and answering your questions tonight. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank everyone. I thank you all for coming out tonight, and also thank the organizers, the Barriere Chamber of Commerce. If they didn't host this, who would host something in Barriere and invite all of us? And you know, Mr. Finlayson's right. All the leaders should be invited. His leader got invited to the national debates, mine didn't. That's not a surprise. Yeah, our party is the only one that stands in opposition to the capitalist system. And you don't need me to tell you how unfair it is to have a billionaire like Jimmy Pattison close down mills down this valley because they aren't making 7 or 10% return, right? Maybe they're making 1 or 2% return on investment. Well, that's a serious problem, and it's totally unfair because all those years that the working people of this valley put into developing that industry, utilizing the resources in this region, giving all the excess profits of their labor to the owner of Canfor, and when things aren't going perfect for him, he just closes doors. And who's out of work? The people that live here. Well, our party is in opposition to the type of system that allows that type of accumulation of power and wealth into the hands of so few people that when they wave their hand, the rest of us are made to suffer. That's why we support the democratic ownership of our industries, our resources, and so that when a threat like that happens and there's a downturn, the people will decide, the workers would decide, do we shut down or do we agree to a wage cut to get us through this for a small time? Do we agree to take voluntary layoffs, a few of us, so that we can keep operating, even if we're losing 5 or 10%? We're all still employed. And take that power away from individual billionaires who say, nah, those people don't matter. They don't matter in all of rural BC. I got my billions. I don't have enough. And by the way, Mr. Pattison's billions went from about $3 billion in 2009 to about $10 billion, the Jim Pattison Group, just a couple years ago. So it's not like he's starving. Anyway, our party is the only one that is fundamentally opposed to the exploitation, the unnecessary pillaging of the working people of Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So I guess what we'll do, if it's all right with everybody here, is I've got quite a few submitted questions already, so I'll ask a question if I can on behalf of the Barriere Chamber, and we'll get a chance for the candidates to respond. Some of the questions are to a specific candidate. Some of those questions are to all of the candidates, and then we'll just mix it in with people that are willing to stand up and ask a question. Is everybody okay with that? It's good? Okay. So first off, this is a question to all the candidates. Is there a senior strategy for seniors needing home care from your party? What about pay for unpaid families who are staying at home? So Ken, do you want to start that off? Do you want to do it just from sitting down with the mic, and then you don't have to come up?
Yeah.
You guys don't mind passing it around? I can help you out with that? Okay.
Yeah. Well, the first thing, healthcare, of course, we believe is a provincial issue. It is under our Constitution. That's where it's supposed to be. We think that local governments closer to the people in need, are the ones that can make the decisions a lot better than some faceless Mandarin in Ottawa. And we don't believe that one size fits everybody. You people know what you need here to take care of your health needs. So that $40 billion a year that Ottawa currently takes from the provinces and then gives back to them with no accountability whatsoever for how it's spent, would go back to the provinces to run their own health care. And that's our position on health care. We think the people that need it locally are the best ones to administrate it, not some bureaucrat in Ottawa.
Thanks, Ken.
Can you please repeat just the second part of the question?
Certainly can, Cynthia. So basically they're talking about a senior strategy for seniors needing home care. So what about paying people unpaid, families? So if there's somebody that's able to stay at home, for being able to pay that person for some form of health care for a family member. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yes?
I believe so. Yeah. So the federal NDP we prioritize health care, and one of those would definitely be seniors, even though it is not a provincial jurisdiction, but I could be wrong. There already is, I believe, there's already something within the federal funding that you can stay home, but it's, I believe it's unpaid. So I'm going to let Iain answer. Thank you.
So no, So I'll just say outright, I haven't memorized the Green Party platform, so I don't have an answer to the question based on our platform, at the tip of my tongue. I can tell you that we are talking about setting up a program so that young people in need of housing can be connected to seniors who are in need of support around the house and companionship. Certainly that's just one of the things we're talking about in terms of encouraging healthcare for seniors and assisting them. The other thing we're talking about, which will assist seniors and other people living in poverty, is a guaranteed livable wage, which is something that will lift people out of poverty and also help seniors and young people in terms of being able to afford to live in this community. So, but to the specific question, I should just say, I'm not sure what our program is. I know we have a full platform which addresses senior care.
Well, healthcare is delivered primarily by the province, but 25% of the health budget is provided in a transfer from the federal government. We know that seniors are a big part of the healthcare system. In fact, about 10% of the hospital beds are taken up with what they call alternate level of care. These are mostly seniors that are waiting for placement in seniors' residences in many cases, but the reality is many can be at home with proper home care. And so as health minister, we created the first office of the seniors advocate in Canada to make sure that we are delivering proper care to seniors. But the federal government, the Liberal government, when they negotiated with us as provinces for the new federal transfers, dedicated a fund for home care to increase the amount of available care to keep people at home, because why be in the hospital when you can be at home longer? My dad is 87. Fortunately, he has a partner at home that can be with him, but IHA comes in on a regular basis to provide home care, and that keeps him from tipping over the edge and going into the hospital. So the federal government has committed those funds, but they've also added other benefits to seniors to make life more affordable by increasing or decreasing the age of eligibility for OAS from 67, where the Conservatives raised it, back down to 65. By increasing by 10% the OAS at 75 years of age, and now proposing a 25% increase in CPP for survivors. Again, all of that will make life more affordable for seniors. Thank you.
So, as indicated, the delivery of healthcare services is predominantly a provincial responsibility. But what the Conservative Party has done is created the healthcare guarantee. If you recall, back in the 90s when we got into a very serious debt crisis, it was solved on the backs of provinces with these decreased transfers. We know we're going to have serious challenges because of a government that is spending out of control, but we do know how important this healthcare guarantee is, which includes both mental health services and home care, and so those transfers will continue to the provinces. In terms of allowing people to stay at home, one of the initiatives that I was proud of with our government was through the EI system, allowing people to take care of a loved one as they were needing palliative care or providing that kind of support. So certainly we recognize that it is an important role. We actually did create opportunities through the EI system, but I think it's something that every future government needs to continue to look at, is in terms of how we support people in the home through whatever levers, whether it's federal, provincial, whatever levers are available to them.
Can I please get the whole question?
Sure. So it's kind of a two-part question, Peter.
Yeah.
So basically, is there a senior strategy for seniors needing home care from your party? And what about pay for unpaid family members that would be able to stay at home?
Right, so our party absolutely supports meeting people's needs when they're required. And if seniors need care, then let's provide it. We have the resources. We're an very wealthy country, but we need to direct those resources into home care. And we would totally support providing extra funding for family members who are staying home to provide that support for their elderly parent. It's a more humane way to treat our seniors. Oh, thanks for that. It's a more humane way to treat our seniors and to give them a better quality of life, to have family members there available to care for them, and also not to burden the family members who are currently, I mean, my mom's, really old. I just remembered she wouldn't want me talking about it. So let's put it that way. I understand the pressures of having to take care of your elderly folks, and I also have 8, 6, 3, 1-year-old children. So, I'm among that sandwich generation where we're taking care of both generations. We can amend the Health Act to ensure that provinces will be obligated in their delivery of service to fulfill the needs of seniors.
Thanks very much. Okay, so who wants to be the first person to ask a question?
This is just for all the candidates. So about the new Bill C-71, what are the actions going to be taken? Is it going to be taken against law-abiding citizens of Canada, or is it going to be taken against the criminal element? That's what I'd like to know.
So remind everybody what that element is. What does it refer to?
Actually, they're going after law-abiding. They're bringing in stricter laws, which the laws we have now in Canada right now are more than adequate enough. It's not like a lot of people believe that we can run into a service station, buy ammo, guns, whatever. There's a long, strict process of being able to get a firearm, and you have to have your PAL and PAL-R for these firearms. And it's our opinion that for some of the groups I belong to that they should be going after the criminal element and leaving the law-abiding people and the law status quo as it is, because there's more than enough safety procedures and laws involved.
Okay, that sounds great. You want to start, Peter?
No.
Okay. How about our Member of Parliament? Would you like to comment on that?
So we would fully intend to repeal C-71. We believe that there is a serious issue in terms of guns and gangs, especially in our cities. But which is what the other parties tend to do, they continually want to go after law-abiding sports, hunters and sport shooters, and they don't actually really target the issue, which is the guns and gangs in cities. So C-71 is another example of that rural-urban misunderstanding, the misunderstanding of what is happening in these rural areas. And so we are, as I say, the party that would repeal C-71, would go after the gangs and guns with very targeted approach, especially in our urban areas.
Want to go this way or that way?
You can go back there if you like,
Yeah, I can.
that's fine. I know everybody's going to have a response to that.
So our party is supportive of greater restrictions on gun ownership and gun use. We do have a serious problem with influx of guns from our neighbors to the south, and that influx is utilized primarily by the criminal element. So we have a significant problem with trying to balance the need for firearms, especially in rural communities, but the severe problem of crime using guns in the urban areas. So I'm torn on this as well, and I think you should have the right to bear arms in the rural communities, but we specifically need to nail down those automatic rifles, handguns that are used and designed for killing people, and take those off the streets. I do need to correct Mr. Currie a little bit, because our party too wants to work with other parties. Thing is, we need some MPs first. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter.
Well, first of all, I don't think the Liberal Party wants to come after your guns in rural Canada. And I certainly would not support that. I'm not a hunter, but I have great respect for rural and the culture of hunting and target shooting. And I think Canadians know how to do that properly. We do have generally very safe laws. But there is, and Peter mentioned this, you can't get away from the fear that exists in particularly urban areas when they look south of the border and they see mass shootings carried out by weapons like AR-15s. They get very, very concerned that the same thing could happen here. Now, I was in 100 Mile and I met two ladies who gave me a lecture on the difference between automatic weapons and what was being proposed to be banned and what wasn't. And it was more than I had learned before. So I have a lot to learn on this issue, but I can assure you I am not in favor of people coming after your legally and well-kept, well-protected firearms. But I think generally Canadians wonder why we need assault-style weapons for hunting or for recreation. I think the government is trying to address a concern that really is very prevalent in many of our urban centers across Canada.
So this is where I have a little bit to teach as opposed to learn, just from the perspective of having been a Crown prosecutor for about 18 years and dealing with the criminal code aspect of it. I'm not a gun owner myself, but I do understand the laws that we have on the books with respect to handguns. So there isn't a problem with legal handguns walking down the streets of Toronto, because of course there is no such thing as legally being able to transport your handgun down the streets of Toronto. It is strictly regulated, and we don't have a difficulty with legal automatic weapons being used in crime, because there is no such thing. And so the regulations we have seem to be sufficient. And the various liberal and conservative responses to the legitimate fear of people in cities with respect to gun violence. There has been way too much gun violence. But that's not going to be solved by going back to Stephen Harper's false tough on crime legislation, which made more work for courts and judges and prosecutors, but made no impact on the level of crime in this country, especially gun crime, which has been going up. And it certainly isn't going back to the complicated, expensive, and ineffective long gun registry. And so what we need is, we need to deal with the root causes of crime. That's much more challenging and much less sexy than Bill C-71 or other or the proposed legislation that the Liberals have come up with now to make No, that's all done. No, that was a red. I'm done.
So just quickly, I also haven't memorized my NDP the NDP platform in the 8 days that I've been the candidate, but I do know that in answer to your question, sir, the person who asked it, I don't think going after law-abiding citizens is something that the NDP believes in. I too have two daughters. I have two daughters, and my husband was very vehement about teaching them about guns, and they have their pals, and I know it's very strict. So I feel that if anything happens, the answer should be going after the criminals. Thank you.
We're not going to take your guns. That's all you need to know. In fact, the People's Party, I concur with everybody at this table that, we need to quit targeting law-abiding citizens, and that is precisely what Bill C-71 does, regardless of what my cohorts here at the table say about how they feel about guns. It's how the Liberal Party feels about guns. That's what we're concerned about. We're not taking your guns.
So here's the question to our candidates. Do you think politicians should be held to higher standards than the regular voter regarding laws and moral standards? So who would like to answer that one first? Cynthia?
Absolutely. Yes, is the answer.
Well, now the pressure's on. So yeah, I think it's fair to, I think because politicians, people who represented communities, are representing your communities, our community, and because we have taken, volunteered, we have volunteered to be up here, however foolish that seems at the moment. And so I think it is fair to hold our politicians to the highest ethical standard, and so a highest moral standard. I don't know if there's is anything embedded or intended by the question more than that, but I think it is fair to hold us to a high standard.
It's an interesting question. You know, I think people want politicians who do their job, who represent them well, who are their strong voice, and every 4 years you get to evaluate whether or not they've done that job. So I think their performance doing their job is what should be the primary consideration when you're voting for a person to be your elected representative. If we just select people that don't have faults, we wouldn't have anyone up here. Because I have faults. Well, sorry, Iain, I guess you're perfect, but I'm not. Should we be held to a higher moral standard? Depends on what moral standard you want to use. I like to drink beer. Other people like to smoke cannabis. Other people, smoke cigarettes. Was one more moral than the other? It's very, very subjective. Should your political representatives work hard for you and be honest and trustworthy? Absolutely. But should you have a different moral standard for one person over another? I'm not sure. I really think we're judged on the work we do for you, and you're up for a review every 4 years.
So I would love to know a little bit more about what was behind that question and whether it was alluding to, some of the current issues that we know the government's facing. But I think the point about every 4 years that you are able to choose and re-choose is important. And I do think no one's perfect, but I think at the end of the day, I hope you can say that when you make your choice that you're proud of whoever it is that you choose to, and that hopefully you'd be proud of all of us at this table in terms of our willingness to be moral and ethical and to do the job.
Yeah, I think you should be held to a higher moral standard. You're expected to be a leader in your community. You should be a leader in every part of your life. And my personal motto is everything you do says something about who you are. And I carry that with me everywhere I go, and I expect when I raise my kids, I teach them the same thing. Everything you do says something about who you are. I got to throw this in. I'm the former president of the Kamloops-Thompson District Labor Council, which had 13,000 members, and is the largest democratically organized NGO in this area. So like Cathy and Mr. Lake, I have experience representing many, many people. And that carries a certain amount of responsibility. And when you look at sending someone to Ottawa as your MP, they should be accustomed to carrying a lot of responsibility and being accountable to the people that elected them. And I got 30 seconds. I think we do need to forgive people for their mistakes, and this might be coming a bit from the brown face issue with Mr. Trudeau and his actions before, but I'm less concerned about his personal actions in his personal life, and I'm more concerned about his racist policies in terms of ignoring Indigenous rights and not reconciling them And also our foreign policy, where we're routinely involved in wars of aggression, acts of war crimes, acts that are considered crimes against humanity in countries like Libya and the Middle East. I'm more concerned about the immoral policies than the immoral personal actions.
Thanks, Peter. And Ken?
Well, we all seem to be in agreement that politicians should be held to higher standards. So do I agree. I guess the question is, how do we enforce it? Somebody help me here. Doesn't BC have recall legislation eventually, Terry? Do you know? Yeah. How's it work? How's it working?
Depends who you ask.
We need to put some teeth in it. We need to put some teeth in it. We got ethics commissioners down in Ottawa that just make a joke out of any accountability down there. We've got leadership that ignores. Ours is the party of free speech. I think the Green Party is too, right? Maybe not? Well, you better not disagree. Anyway, we don't restrict our MPs when it comes, or candidates when it comes to talking about issues. Andrew Scheer has, for example, the abortion debate. I don't care if you want to talk about straw hats. If there's 1,000 people, or if there's a significant number of your constituents, the people that you promise to represent, want to talk about the man in the moon, you should be compelled to address their concerns, not the leader of the party. I think that's accountability. Currently, the way the system works, the leaders of the party dictate what the candidates or MPs are allowed to represent on behalf of their constituents, and I don't think that's right.
Thank you. All right, so do we have another question from the audience?
I'd like to just take us back a step to the very first question. I feel, Peter, that you answered the second part of that question, but the other 5, you answered the first part of the question, and I'd like to take us back to the second part of the question. My mother-in-law is 99 years old, and she lives with us. We've taken her in instead of putting her into home care or a nursing home or whatever. And I have stepped back from my job to a full-time job to working part-time so I can be home to care for her. And there is child tax credit out there for people staying home and looking after their children. And what we would like to see is that we can get some help to stay home with our seniors, like a seniors tax credit, something that can benefit us for staying home and keeping our own family comfortable instead of having to put them somewhere else because we have to stay working to pay our bills. So I would like to know the first 5 candidates, how you actually feel about that part, because I didn't really get that from when it was asked the first time. Thank you.
Thank you. So who would like to start? Kerek?
And thank you for clarifying, because obviously it's very important to you. And as we've noted, delivery of healthcare really is the purview of the provinces, and so the province could play a role there. But I think the federal government could also play a role. And the Canada Child Benefit that you cited is a good example of helping people that are raising a family. Now you're paying back your family, and to have a caregiver benefit, I think is something that should be considered. And to be honest, I don't think any of the parties have turned their mind specifically to that, but I think it's a really a worthy idea to consider. So I will make note of that and take it back. Thank you very much.
So I think what I'd indicated in the first round is we did make some steps in that direction in the previous government in terms of having an EI program that allowed you to take time off to take care of your loved ones. But I think what I'm hearing from you is it's a step further in terms of what you're contemplating. And really, I don't believe that I've heard any of the parties being that specific in terms of policies that have been put out as of yet. But certainly it is a growing challenge in our, especially in our rural communities. I always remember this gentleman that had to take the train to go visit his mom who was in Lillooet at the time. He lived in Pemberton, and seeing that separation because they couldn't manage at home anymore, and at the end of their lives to be separated in that way in rural communities was terribly, terribly sad. And so ways that we can support families is an important thing to discuss anyway.
Peter, do you want? I think Peter might
Yeah.
want.
I just have a little addendum to it because the big opposition is how are you going to fund that? Where are you going to find the money? Now, our party is proposing a cut to the military budget by about 75%. It's currently $24 billion. The Liberals want to increase it to $32 billion. If all these right-wing parties adhere to Mr. Trump's demands, it goes to $70 billion is what he wants at. We're not at war. We don't need to waste that money bombing the heck out of people in other parts of the world. Like we dropped 9,000 bombs on Libya as at Canadian-led NATO effort. 9,000 bombs on a country of 6 million people. That's like dropping 60 bombs on Kamloops alone. Each bomb, $1 million. That's not money we need to keep on wasting. That's money that should be going to seniors, for example.
Yes, and thanks for the opportunity to clarify and reminding us to answer the second important part of the question. So, like Terry and Cathy and Peter, I think it's an excellent idea, and I think Cathy is right. I don't remember the Green Party platform specifically addressing the issue, but you are by caring for someone who would otherwise be cared for in the public system, you are creating a public good. And that should be encouraged. And as our population ages, it should be encouraged even more. And so I agree with that. I would also note that I mentioned before in my answer the guaranteed livable income, which is part of the Green Party platform, and that would provide an opportunity for people who are in that position to make the choice to, in fact, have a living wage in order to stay at home with a loved one, with a child, or with a parent, and would allow those choices to be made. But until that's in place, it would require lots of cooperation and lots of work with the provinces. And what you're suggesting makes a lot of sense.
Thank you again for an opportunity to re-answer. The federal NDP has head-to-toe healthcare as a mandate. So from everything from pharmacare, that's universal pharmacare, to a Dentacare plan for seniors, anyone who makes $70,000 or less, vision care, etc. But specifically to your point about the elderly tax credit, I don't have an answer for you. I think it's an awesome idea. I just helped. I'm a union activist as in my other spare time, as well as working full-time for the provincial government. But we just negotiated a union contract that gave 1 or 2 days to people, 1 or 2 paid leave days for them to look after their elderly parents. So it's a concept I agree with, and I'm wondering if, and I know this probably isn't going to help everyone, but if you could give your question specifically to my campaign manager, I would get you a more specific question from the platform of our party. Your question and or, her name is Catherine, a question and or your information if I'm allowed to contact you back with that.
Well, I just want to commend that lady on an absolutely brilliant question. I agree with you. That is. And we need politicians to react to that. Now, we said earlier that our party believes that health care is a provincial responsibility, and that's true enough. But you're talking about a tax credit equivalent to the child tax credit, and a senior is at least... Oh, who's shooting? Anyway, looking after a senior is at least as difficult, if not more so, than looking after a child. So that is an absolutely brilliant solution. We need to do this. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. So next up, I think this question says basically everyone here has to live within their means, live within their budgets on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So to all the candidates, what is your party's position in the next 4 years on when it comes to budgets, and what is the policy of your party? So who wants to do that one? Iain?
Sure. So the Green Party has put out a costed platform by the Parliamentary Budget Office. We were the first party to submit our platform in 2015. So our platform proposes that we reduce the deficit every year until we leave with a balanced budget in 5 years. So that's where we stand. We don't just stand for environmental sustainability, but also fiscal sustainability, and we don't want to leave our children with an undue deficit.
Canada has a deficit, but our debt to GDP ratio is the envy of the G7. It's the lowest of all the Western industrialized countries, and it is decreasing under our platform. It decreases every year, and that means that when you are earning income, you're earning enough income through the economy to pay for the services, the things that you need. This government has invested in people and communities. I mentioned doubling of the gas tax that goes to infrastructure funding for communities like Barriere. I mentioned the Canada Child Benefit that has lifted 900,000 people, including 300,000 children, out of poverty. The debt has to be manageable, and it is manageable in Canada. We're one of only 2 G7 countries that has a AAA credit rating from the top 3 rating agencies around the world. I was in a government for 8 years, provincially, that was totally fixated on balancing the budget. And we argued, many of us in that government, to invest more in people, to increase income assistance rates, to increase disability rates. Unfortunately, our voices did not win the day on those things. That government is no longer in power because I think people realize that in order to have good government, you need to invest in people and communities. And it has to be sustainable for sure. I'm a fiscally responsible politician, always have been, but I believe the investments we make in people and communities are paying off in Canada today.
Our national debt is now around $760 billion. We were to get back to balanced budget this year. Instead, we're going to have a $14 billion deficit. And next year, the current government is proposing a $27 billion deficit. I think we all understand the concept of you borrow money to perhaps put a mortgage on your house, but you shouldn't be in the position where you're borrowing money to buy your groceries and your gas every day. And that's what the current government is doing. If we have any shocks to our economy, if interest rates rise, we're going to be back to where we were in the 90s. And I don't know if you remember that, but I remember the serious and significant cuts that had to be made by government to get us out of what was a mess. So from my perspective, that's one of my biggest concerns is this current government is just spending money. They seem to have no restraint. I think it was billions and billions of dollars that were announced between the run-up to the election. And I do want to note there wasn't a penny for the forestry industry during that time. It was sort of sprinkled across the country, billions of dollars. So we need to be fiscally responsible. Yes, we need to perhaps at times borrow money for infrastructure, but we can't be borrowing money to pay for the groceries and the heat. And so we certainly do believe in a fiscally responsible government and have a 5-year, would be returning to balanced budget in 5 years. And I do have to note, if you look at the Chrétien-Martin government, when times are good, they paid off the debt. This government has had good times. The $14 billion that they spent, they had an extra $22 billion in revenue that they also spent that they hadn't intended. So it is a problem, and I'm concerned.
our resources, budget and tax-wise, are manipulated and exploited by corporations. We have the capacity and the will for people want to see wealth more equitably distributed. We all understand the basic principles of how unfair it is to have a few folks controlling so much of our economy and having, like I mentioned, Mr. Pattison, well, he's just one of a few dozen of Canada's billionaires. I mean, we need to start taxing people appropriately and tax corporations appropriately. That money should be redistributed for the needs that people have. And I agree with Mr. Lake's position that people are an investment too. And we need to invest in the health of our population, in the education of our population, in the infrastructure of our population. And we need to re-industrialize, because Canada, since the free trade agreements, has been going through a process of de-industrialization. And the closure of your mills is de-industrialization. We're getting rid of those value-added jobs. They're flowing out of our borders, and we're hacking down our raw resources, sending it out, and then buying back the finished product. Well, that's not going to help. That's not going to help create a balanced budget or create more wealth within our communities, and it also undermines our capacity, our democratic rights and responsibilities to take care of each other when we're at the whims of foreign.
One of our senior members would like to ask the next question.
I'm Carmen Smith. We have a cedar mill here, actually, we have a mill working in the valley. The question I have to Mr. Lake and the party here is Trudeau seems to be more willing to pay the farmers, dairy farmers in particular, in Quebec. And we, as a lumber industry in BC, are the highest cost producers in the world. Okay? And why is that? Trudeau has done nothing, absolutely nothing, for the softwood industry. For the softwood industry tax, we're paying 30%. Just think that what it would do in the pockets of the people in this country. There wouldn't be as many mill closures because the companies could see fit. The problem is the Liberals think about the East and nothing about the West. And the problem there is, I'll ask the question.
30 seconds, Carmen.
Okay, what are they finally going to do about the softwood lumber tax, Mr. Lake?
Carmen, I liked it a lot better when you were on my team. We do know that the softwood lumber dispute has been going on for a long time. The Conservatives were in government and did not solve it. And it is an ongoing problem. Now we've got a president of the United States that's very difficult to deal with. Doesn't mean we don't give up, and it doesn't mean we don't work hard. I think Canada worked very well on the new free trade agreement to the benefit of Canadians. They need to put that same effort into the softwood lumber agreement. But Carmen, you know very well that most of the policies that affect lumber, the forest industry, in British Columbia are provincial policies. And we have a stumpage rate that is 5 times that of Alberta. And that makes it very uncompetitive. When people are bidding or paying prices that are based on bids, BC timber sales from based on bids from BC timber sales 6 months to 12 months ago, and don't represent the market today, that's a problem. And the provincial government needs to get their head around that problem. Now, the federal government does have a role to play for sure. We need to look at what we can do. Working with the provincial government, settling the softwood lumber dispute, getting a good deal for Canadian forestry. We need to invest in communities. So forest-dependent communities like Barriere, like Clearwater, should be at the front of the line for those infrastructure projects. That keeps people working, at least, and putting infrastructure in the ground. I'm a huge advocate for that. We've announced plans to plant 2 billion trees over the next 10 years. That will keep some people working in the forest industry. It will also, of course, regenerate forest health, which will make the available timber that much greater into the future. And finally, we need to look at fuel management. We can use a lot of people in the forest industry to mitigate fuel risks from climate change in and around our forest-dependent communities. So there is something we can do, Carmen, but I have to remind you that most of that is under the provincial government, as you well know.
Yeah, let's see the bucks. Federal haven't put a damn cent into these communities that's not true.
That is not
So,
Thank you for your question.
so we had a softwood lumber agreement from 2006 to 2016 when we were first elected in 2006. President Obama and Prime Minister Trudeau promised a new softwood lumber agreement. They did not get the job done. It is now more difficult to get the job done, but it was promised a number of years ago. So I think the federal government, we do know it's provincial, the federal government has a role to play. It has a role to play for the industry softwood lumber agreement. It has a role to play for the workers in terms of an EI flexible program, and it has a role to play for communities. What I have been most disappointed with, again, this crisis has been months and months and months, and it's been brewing. The government was sprinkling money across the country. When Trudeau came to Kamloops, he did not even mention in the summer the crisis in our forests, and I think that was absolutely shameful. I think that this is 5,000 to 6,000 jobs, and to not even mention it, you look at what happened. SNC was all about saving some jobs. What about these jobs here and taking the role that the federal government can do? So it's all good to say what you can do in the future, but you didn't do it when you had the chance.
You've been government for
Lumber agreement. Softwood lumber agreement.
Am I going to have to move you guys? Peter.
Well, I don't accept the premise that this is all a provincial issue, because it's the federal government that negotiates free trade agreements, or as we call them, corporate rights agreements, because they're not really free, right? We give up our rights in many ways, in labor standards, environmental standards. That's why workers in Mexico who make cars are continuing to have factories come there, because they work for $3 an hour. In the States, it was $16 an hour. In Canada, it's $30 an hour. So you can see the flow of jobs heading down. Well, those trade agreements are the responsibility of the federal government. And when we see that our value-added industries, like our mills, are closing down, that is in part because of our trade relationships. We need, our party supports investing in value-added industries, adding value to that wood. Like, God, our furniture is made of wood. Why are we importing furniture? Right? So some really basic things. Yeah, we can get stuff for cheap, but the cost is we end up laying off and closing factories across Canada so that we can buy stuff cheaper elsewhere. Well, ultimately, you reach the end of that economic drive to get lower and lower and cheaper stuff, and you run out of money in your own domestic economy. And that's a situation we're heading towards right now.
Ken?
That's a great question. You're absolutely right. This government's completely tone deaf when it comes to the biggest economic engine driving the BC economy. It's plumb nuts. Sockboy goes down to the negotiation. Now, Donald Trump is a brutal negotiator. He's a brutal businessman. He's a brutal in a lot of respects, but he's looking after his country. Now, Donald Trump, when we went into that free trade negotiation, Donald Trump said that the supply management, the dairy cartel, that had to go. Well, it didn't. Our negotiating team, led by Ms. Freeland under Trudeau, come to the table to deal with a hard-nosed, brutal businessman, and what do they want to talk about? Plastic straws and gender pronouns. How interested do you think Trump is in that? we've got a 22% duty down here south of Abbotsford at Sumas, essentially barring our lumber from entering one of the most lucrative markets in the United States. We've got a 300% duty stopping American dairy from coming into Canada that looks after 9,000 dairy farms. Trump hates that duty because his vote-rich states are Wisconsin, Iowa, New York, upstate New York. If we would trade that 300% dairy duty, maybe this brutal businessman would let us get some of our lumber into the most lucrative market in the world, and maybe that would help the BC lumber industry. But they'll never think of it down east.
Specifically on the softwood lumber question, even though they disagree, I respectfully don't think I could add anything to either what Mr. Lake or Ms. McLeod said. However, the platform of the NDP is definitely to also replant forests in BC. Also, we do not believe that lumber should be leaving our province. Logs. And we also, thank you.
So I think the question was directed at the federal government's involvement in the forest industry and providing some relief. I just want to provide just a contrast in terms of the choices that the federal government has made in terms of assisting businesses. Some of the richest countries in the world that are running the oil sands in Alberta required some assistance from the federal government, or wanted some assistance from the federal government. In terms of, I'm not going to deal with the climate change issue, but just in terms of getting their product to a market in Asia, that market that may or may not exist, but they asked for the federal government's help, and the federal government is going to spend a total of about $15 billion to assist the oil and gas industry, which amounts to, for every displaced forest worker in this province, $2.5 million each, for each and every one of them. So the choices the federal government is making in terms of assisting, in terms of businesses, in my view, they should be making different choices, and they should be investing in the forest sector in BC.
Thanks, Ian.